If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. When the channel reaches 1,000 subscribers, I will share a surprise story that I have prepared especially for you. Your support is really valuable for the continuation of these stories. Wyoming Territory, late autumn, 1879. The sun was nearly gone. What light remained stretched thin across the dry ridge of Split Rock Pass, turning the dust a dull orange. The wind had picked up over the last hour, steady and sharp, pushing against the boards of a small cabin that stood alone at the edge of the land. Colt Ashburn stepped outside, closing the door behind him with a solid thud. He stood still for a moment, one hand resting lightly on the worn handle of the door, eyes narrowed against the wind. He wore a dark wool coat that had seen better years, the collar turned up, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. His face, tanned, lined, and unsmiling, was the kind that had forgotten how to relax. It wasn't hostility, just time, just weather, just years of not having anyone to smile at. The yard was simple, a fence perimeter of rough-hewn pine, a small collapsed shed near the back, and an old mule chewing what grass was left along the fence. Beyond that, only the hills and sky. Colt stood over the sink, pouring water into a tin pot. He hadn't slept. Every so often, his eyes had drifted to her, watchful, assessing. He wasn't sure if he expected her to bolt, wake screaming, or die in her sleep. None of it had happened. She stirred just as he set the pot over the flame. Her breath caught. She sat up too fast, then froze in place as pain shot through her shoulder. "Don't do that," Colt said evenly, without turning. "You're hurt." She blinked at him, eyes still clouded by sleep and fear. Then she looked around. The fire, the cot, the dog by the door. "Him. You carried me," she said hoarsely. Colt didn't answer right away. He stirred the pot. Just snow melt, heating for coffee. "You were bleeding," he said. Didn't seem like a time to negotiate. She said nothing for a while. Her eyes drifted to the bandage on her arm. She touched it lightly, testing the pain. "I didn't mean to come here," she said. "I figured. My horse died a few miles back. Got shot." His dog, Rook, lay under the porch steps, head on his paws, watching. Colt walked across the dirt path toward the woodshed, boots heavy on the ground. He needed to brace the door again before the storm arrived. He could feel it coming deep in his joints. Maybe snow overnight. He preferred snow. It kept things quiet. For nearly 8 years, this had been his life. He'd come here after selling off the last of his cattle and walking away from the Ashburn Ranch, once a modest but respected spread west of Cheyenne. That was before the fire, before the lawsuit, before the bodies. Most folks who knew his name thought he was dead. He never corrected them. He wasn't running, but he sure as hell wasn't returning. Inside the cabin, everything had a place. A wood stove with a rusted kettle, a cot with wool blankets, a rough table and one chair, a rifle mounted over the hearth, 3 coffee tins filled with dry beans. Nothing more than what he needed, and nothing less. He lived quietly. She'd been locked in a cellar outside Abilene for 4 days before she escaped. Stole his pistol, wounded his man, ran with no plan. She'd been running ever since. Colt listened, arms crossed, face unreadable. "He won't let it go," she said quietly. "Men like that don't." Colt didn't answer right away. Then he stood, walked to the gun rack, and took down the rifle. Checked the action. Full magazine. "If he comes," he said, "he won't leave again." She looked at him with something close to disbelief. "You'd kill for me?" He met her gaze. "No, I'd kill to keep this place the way it is." The meaning was clear. This place, the quiet, the safety, the fragile thing they were building, had become worth defending. She nodded, not grateful, not relieved, just understanding. That night, as the fire burned low and the wind started again, Lenora rose from her seat. She walked to the door, checked the latch, then looked out across the dark hills. After the fire was banked, after the dishes were cleaned and put away, she stood at the door for a long moment before heading to the cot. "Colt," she said, without looking back, "if someone came for me, if they found this place, would you turn me over?" "No." "Why not?" He didn't speak for a while. "Because this place doesn't get built twice," he said. "And I'm not letting someone burn it down just to settle a score I didn't start." That night, They slept with both lamps out and the shotgun leaning by the door. Outside, the world was still. Cold, but still. And inside, two people who didn't belong to anyone anymore, who didn't owe a damn thing to anyone, sat in the same space, neither waiting for the other to disappear. That in itself was a kind of promise. Quiet, unwritten, but real. 2 days later, the sky changed. It was the kind of gray that didn't just suggest snow, it promised it. The wind had gone still. Inside the cabin, Lenora had already moved to the second window. She took aim and fired twice. Her shots scattered dirt near Silas' boots. Not a miss, warning shots. She was still holding back. Colt turned to her. "Don't hesitate next time." "I won't," she said. Outside, gunfire opened. Wild, sporadic. One slug tore through the upper window pane, splintering the far wall. Another cracked the corner post. Colt ducked, exhaled slow. He leaned out and fired again, this time hitting the edge of a boot. The man cried out. Silas shouted, voice ragged now. "You shoot again, and I'll torch the place." "You do," Colt yelled back, "and you burn with it." Silence. Then, crunching snow. Colt signaled Lenora to stay back and moved to the back wall. There, footsteps. One of the men had circled the cabin, trying to find another entry. Rook growled low. Lenora, calm, stepped to the far side window and waited. When a shadow came into view, she fired once. The shape dropped. He unfolded it slowly, read a few lines, then handed it to Lenora. "She's got daughters," he said. "About your age now. Last I heard, they moved to Oregon." Lenora ran her fingers over the paper, then folded it again. "You gonna write her back?" "I might," Colt said. "Tell her I'm not dead after all." She smiled, genuine quiet. "You should." Later, as the fire burned low and Rook stretched out by the door, they sat beside each other in silence. No distance between their chairs. No barriers in the space. No ghost left to chase. There was no kiss. No confession. Just a hand resting on a knee, left there a little longer than before. Just two people who had outlived what tried to end them. Who had chosen to stay, not because they had to, but because they could. And in a land where everything was built by hand and hard weather, that was as close to a happy ending as anyone ever got. They had earned it. Together. Rook lay by the door, but kept his ears perked. Colt didn't sleep that night. He stayed in the chair, watching the flames rise and fall in the stove, and listened to the storm roll in. His mind turned, slow but firm. Who the hell was she? Why here? What did she run from? And did it follow her? But under all the caution, something else crept in, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Responsibility. He didn't know her story yet. Didn't need to. Not tonight. All he knew was that she'd made it as far as his door, and that made her his problem now. He stood slowly, stoked the fire, and set her boots by the stove to dry. He didn't speak, didn't look back, but he didn't lock the door either. Morning came gray and heavy. The storm had passed, but not without leaving its mark. Snow clung to the fence posts like dried plaster, and the wind had quieted to a slow whistle through the eaves. Inside the cabin, the heat from the stove had dipped, but the girl hadn't moved. That's the point. Silence stretched between them again, but not empty silence. It was a working kind of silence where things settled into place. Rook got up, circled once, then sat by the girl's side. She reached out slowly and touched the dog's head. He didn't flinch. "What's his name?" "Rook." "He's quiet. So am I." She nodded. She seemed to understand what kind of place she'd landed in now. One where words were rationed, trust was slow, and every gesture had weight. Colt cleared the mugs, set them in the sink. Then he stood near the stove with one hand resting on the table. "You gonna tell me your name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Lenora. Lenora Vale." He nodded once. "Colt Ashburn." She seemed to recognize the name. A flash of something, maybe disbelief, crossed her face. "You're that cattleman," she said. "From over near Cheyenne." "Used to be. They said you burned your own ranch down." They said a lot of things. She didn't push. He appreciated that. But what mattered wasn't the dirt on their past. It was whether or not they brought it through the front door. That night, as they ate quietly, beans and cornbread over the stove, Lenora spoke again, this time softer. "Why didn't you just let me die on the porch?" Colt looked up from his plate. It wasn't an accusation. It was curiosity. She genuinely wanted to know. He set his fork down. I didn't think about it, he said. Saw blood, saw a person, picked you up. That's it. She stared at him. That's simple. No, he admitted after a beat. But that's all I'm going to say about it. She nodded again, but this time there was something else in her expression. A sliver of trust. Not big, not dramatic, but new. She reached for the coffee pot, refilled both cups without being asked. Later, Colt opened the storage trunk under his cot and pulled out an old flannel shirt, clean and patched, and handed it to her without comment. She took it with both hands. They didn't ask questions that didn't need answers. But there were still questions in the air. Why was she really out here? Who exactly shot her? And what would happen if they came looking? Colt didn't ask, not yet. But he was already watching the tree line more often. He'd kept to himself for a reason. And yet, for the first time in years, someone else's safety now figured into his decisions. Lenora, for her part, said little, but she watched everything. How he moved, how he folded his knife, where he kept the spare shells. She didn't ask to use the stove. She just lit it when it got cold again. That night, after another meal in silence, she sat in the chair across from him by the fire. Her face was soft now, worn out but calmer. Why are you out here? She asked. He thought about lying. Thought about saying it was just land or just solitude. But he said, because I've done things I don't want to explain. She nodded once, like she understood that better than most. Lenora was different too. She no longer flinched at sudden sounds. She moved freely through the cabin and grounds, handling the animals, mending gear, fixing broken hinges without asking. She cut her hair shorter. She took over the garden, turning dead soil into something green with quiet determination. She never said she was staying, but she never packed. One morning, while loading feed into the mule's panniers, Colt finally broke the unspoken question hanging between them since the shooting. You don't have to keep looking over your shoulder, he said. You can send word to someone. Take your name back if you want. Lenora stood silent a moment, then brushed hair from her face. That name doesn't mean anything anymore, she said. Not to me. And there's no one left to send word to. He nodded, unsurprised. Then you'll stay. I already did. That was it. No ceremony. No decision to be made. The choice had been lived into, not spoken. That was how both of them operated. Stay ready, stay quiet, don't hope for anything more than survival. While they worked, Lenora finally broke the silence that had been circling for days. You ever miss your sister? Colt didn't answer at first. He was slicing kindling at the table. Steady, practiced movements. Yes, he said. You ever think of going back? No. Why not? She wrote me. A few times. Said I should come see the kids. But I didn't. Why? He stopped slicing. Looked up. Because when you disappear, people build a version of you that fits their story. I let her keep hers. Lenora nodded. She understood that better than most. There were folks who probably thought she died out there. Abandoned her post, sold herself, ran off with some outlaw. She never corrected any of it. Truth didn't matter much when people preferred their own explanations. She gave a tired smile. I'm still here. Colt nodded. So am I. And for the first time in either of their lives, that felt like enough. By the time the last snow melted off the ridge, the world below the cabin had changed. The sky held longer light. The trail beyond Split Rock Pass was dry in places. The wind had softened. Goats had begun to birth. Spring had not rushed in, but it had come anyway, slow and certain, like it always did. Life didn't ask for permission out here. It just pressed forward. Inside the cabin, the bullet holes were patched, the windows re-glassed with fresh paint from a supply Colt had kept buried in the storage cellar. The third man who died outside was buried beneath a cluster of aspens west of the fence. No marker, just earth, like the others Colt had put in the ground before. Silas and his wounded companion hadn't returned. No one had ridden the ridge since. And for the first time in years, Colt Ashburn wasn't waiting for the past to knock. Then we can't just sit and wait. I'm not, Colt said. He stood, reached under the cot, and pulled out a narrow wooden box. Inside was a short-barreled lever-action carbine. Fast, loud, and effective at close range. He set it on the table. We hold them here. They don't leave. Lenora looked at him hard. You're ready to kill for this place. I'm ready to kill to keep you from being dragged out of it. That stopped the conversation cold. There was no need to speak beyond that. The lines were drawn. Whatever came next would be met with steel and resolve. But as Colt began preparing the cabin, nailing slats across the lowest windows, laying a second rifle near the loft ladder, Lenora stood silently by the table, watching. She thought about the weeks behind them, about how she had arrived half dead, with no name and no plan, about how this man, who had every reason not to care, had built a place where her name didn't have to be earned or sold. Just real. You? Lenora exhaled slowly, eyes forward, not waking up afraid. Neither of them looked away. When the first wildflowers appeared across the ridge, Colt built a second chair for the porch, one that matched his own, cut from the same wood. He didn't say why. He didn't need to. On the last morning of April, Lenora saddled the mule and rode alone down to the creek, 2 miles south. When she returned that afternoon, she brought back a wrapped parcel. New boots for him, stitched by hand, bartered from Booker's wife in town. Colt said nothing when she handed them over. He just nodded, slid off his old pair, and tried them on. They fit. They should, she said. I measured while you were asleep. That night, they shared dinner at the table with the door open wide. The wind was soft. The land beyond the porch had begun to green. As darkness fell, Colt reached into the cabinet above the stove and took out a folded slip of paper, one of Marie's old letters. In the following weeks, they began making changes together. Colt rode into Medicine Creek and returned with new nails, wire, 3 fresh blankets, and a kettle. He also brought back a second-hand mirror, which he hung above the table. Lenora smiled when she saw it, though she didn't say why. Colt built a proper door on the backside of the cabin, complete with a latch she could reach without standing on her toes. She rewrote the inventory journal, neatly, page by page, and tucked it into a drawer with a pencil tied to the handle. Some evenings they sat outside, boots up on the rail, watching the light fade across the pass. They didn't speak much about what had come before. Colt never talked about the fire again. Lenora never mentioned the cellar in Abilene. The past had lost its grip here, not forgotten but outlived. One night, she asked, "What do you miss the most?" Colt took a long moment to think. "Coming home to someone who waits," he said. Then he looked at her. Not hard, not out of preference, out of consequence. He didn't believe in people anymore. He'd seen what they did when pushed. He'd seen what he'd done. And if the price of peace was solitude, then so be it. So when Rook let out a low growl, more confusion than threat, Colt looked up with genuine alertness. His hand dropped instinctively to his hip, where his sidearm used to rest. He didn't carry it anymore, not inside the fence. The gesture alone was enough to sharpen his senses. He turned toward the fence line. A figure moved just beyond the slope, staggering in uneven steps. The shape was small, too thin to be a grown man, not broad enough for a ranch hand. The sun was all but gone now, and the wind carried dust into his eyes. He blinked, watching. The figure came closer. A girl, young, maybe 20, barely able to stand. Her dress was torn at the hem, one sleeve blood-soaked, the other arm pressed to her side. Her hair was knotted and falling from a braid. Colt went outside, pulled on his coat, and began chopping kindling from a stack against the cabin wall. Snow crunched underfoot. The air was bitter. As he worked, he glanced up at the ridge. Still no tracks, but hers. No one coming, not yet. Back inside, Lenora had taken the liberty of folding the blankets and wiping her blood from the floorboards with a damp cloth. She'd found where he kept the tin of lard and used it to grease the hinges on the dry pantry door. Small things. Unspoken things. "Your shoulder will need new bandage tonight," he said, setting the wood near the stove. "You can help with the animals when you're ready." She gave a short nod. "I'm not staying long," she added. "You're not leaving until you can walk a full mile upright." That settled the conversation. The wind picked up again outside, rustling the corner of the roof. As daylight moved through the one small window, they worked quietly. She washed carrots. He fed the mule. Dried blood streaked across her cheek. She didn't yell. She didn't look around. She kept walking until she reached the cabin door and fell to her knees. Colt stood still for a long second. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had lived nearly a decade without anyone showing up. And now, out of nowhere, this girl, injured, half-conscious, was at his door like some kind of test he hadn't prepared for. He didn't move right away. His mind ticked quickly. Is she being followed? Is this bait? What the hell happened to her? Then he saw her hands trembling, the way her chest lifted in short, shallow gasps. The fear in her eyes, not from him, but from whatever she had left behind. He walked forward. Easy, he said flatly. Don't try to stand. She didn't answer. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Colt crouched, took her by the shoulders, and gently shifted her weight toward him. Her body was cold. That worried him more than the blood. The cut on her head looked shallow. I'll walk till I saw your roof. Colt turned then, slowly, and looked at her directly. She was young, maybe 20. Dirty, bruised, but alert. Her clothes were dusty trail rags, nothing suited for winter. She had a knot near her temple and chapped lips. But what struck him most was her posture. Defensive, alert, like someone used to waking up in strange places. Someone shoot you? He asked. She hesitated. Yes. What? Another pause. Her throat worked like she was weighing the risk of honesty. I took something that wasn't theirs. They wanted it back. What was it? She looked down. Myself. Colt didn't speak for a long time. He poured the hot water into 2 mugs, added a scoop of grounds to each, and brought one to her. She took it without thanks. That didn't bother him. I'm not here to cause trouble, she added. I don't get visitors, he replied. Not interested in trouble, either. Then we understand each other. He watched her sip the coffee. She grimaced. Strong. The wound on her shoulder. A graze, probably. But infection was the real risk. He picked her up. She weighed almost nothing. Carried her inside. Rook followed quietly. He laid her on the cot, then knelt by the stove, lighting a fire with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, the room warmed. He removed her coat, more rags than fabric, and checked her wound with the help of a lamp. The bullet hadn't gone deep. A clean graze across the outer deltoid, likely from pistol, maybe .38. At close range, Colt didn't talk as he cleaned the blood with boiled water and tore strips from one of his old shirts to wrap the injury. The girl winced but didn't cry out. He noticed that. She was conscious but not fully present. Survival mode. He offered her a tin cup of water. She took it with shaky hands. No questions. No thanks. No name. He sat in the chair across from her, arms resting on his knees, and watched. She fell asleep fast, exhaustion taking over. Neither of them smiled. But when Rook shifted to lay between them, neither of them moved. And outside, under the weight of another cold wind, the ridge stayed quiet. For now, the days that followed passed in quiet increments. The snow came down in brief, brittle flurries, never heavy enough to trap them in, but enough to remind both of them that the mountains would soon close behind winter's jaw. Each morning brought a little more frost on the windows. Each night came quicker than the last. Colt kept to his routines, feeding the mule, checking the fence line, Rez tacking the firewood, and without being asked, Lenora began to shadow him. At first, she simply followed at a distance, slow from the wound and cautious. But by the 3rd day, she was lifting feed sacks with one arm, trailing behind the mule with measured steps, brushing its coat with her good hand. He didn't tell her to stop. He didn't tell her to keep going, either. Inside, Lenora stirred awake. Her shoulders still ached, but the pain had dulled. She'd learned how to sleep around it. She sat up and instinctively reached for the flannel Colt had given her the night before. It was too big, smelled of ash and cedar, but it was warm. Colt returned with 2 buckets of water from the spring. She met him at the door, taking one from his hand without speaking. He gave a nod. They didn't need small talk. Over the next hour, they moved through their quiet routine, stoking the fire, boiling water, feeding the mule, checking the latch on the gate. Lenora's limp had eased. Her body still flinched with effort, but she didn't complain. Around midday, while sorting dried beans, she finally asked what had been circling in her mind for days. You said you burned your own barn. Colt looked up from his seat by the fire. That's what people said. You didn't deny it. I didn't stop it either. She waited. When she spoke again, her voice was almost too quiet to hear. I had a brother once. He was like you. Wouldn't talk unless it mattered. Got killed in Missouri. Colt didn't say he was sorry. He just said, "That's a hard thing." "Yeah," she replied. He would have liked this place, would have liked the quiet. Then she pulled the chair closer to the fire and sat down, sleeves rolled, her good arm resting across her stomach. Rook sat next to her now, not between them. Outside, a coyote howled in the hills. Inside, neither moved. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel like hiding. It felt like home beginning to take shape. The morning broke colder than before. Frost blanketed the dry brush and turned the cabin's windows to fogged glass. Colt stepped outside early, wrapped in his thick coat, breath visible with every exhale. He moved slowly down the porch steps, eyes scanning the ridge like always. He wasn't expecting trouble, but he never assumed it wouldn't come. He turned to her slightly. "That sounds like something a person says when they've been hunted." "I've been owned," she replied. "They don't call it that, but that's what it was. I left before they could sell me again." Colt didn't react outwardly, but something inside shifted. He didn't ask where or who or how. He just gave a slow nod. "You shoot back?" he asked. "I took the gun. Shot once. Missed. Ran until the horse dropped. And now?" She looked him in the eye. "Now I don't intend on being taken again." There was no drama in her voice. Just fact. Colt took a breath, looked down at the ground. "When I left my place," he said, "there were 3 men dead and 1 barn on fire. I didn't wait for the law to sort it out." Lenora nodded. "I wouldn't have either." It was the first time either of them had confirmed what the other already suspected. Neither of them was innocent. Neither of them had come to this place clean. He shifted slightly in his chair, the weight of memory drawing down his posture. "There was a boy," he said, 15, son of a ranch hand, got caught stealing from the feed stores. I told his father we'd dock the pay, let it go. Next day, the father was found hanging from the hayloft. No note, no witness. Lenora didn't speak. Cole continued. "The boy said I'd threatened them both. Said I burned the barn to cover it up. But I didn't. I didn't do anything. Maybe that was the problem. I stayed quiet too long. The fire was an accident, probably from an oil lamp. But by the time the sheriff came, 3 men were dead, and I was the only one standing." "Why didn't you fight back?" she asked. He looked at her, sharp and tired. "Because by then, I didn't care who believed what. That was the whole of it." Lenora sat down across from him, brushing her hair back. "You ever miss anyone from your old life?" "I miss being able to trust someone without thinking twice," Colt answered. "But people like that don't show up often." She met his eyes. "Maybe they don't. But sometimes they're standing right in front of you and don't say it out loud." They both looked away after that. Later, while she was outside gathering firewood, Colt opened the drawer in the table and pulled out a small, worn bundle, letters tied with twine. He stared at them a long time, then put them back. He'd once had a sister. Her name was Marie. Lived near Carson City with her husband and 2 girls. She wrote him twice a year for a while. Then once. Then never again. Colt had never written back. That night, after dinner, Lenora finally told him about the man who tried to buy her. His name was Silas Dent. Trader out of Dodge. Not a rancher. Not really anything honest. He ran a few contracts, moved livestock, sometimes people. Lenora had been promised a job as a cook for a river merchant, and when she arrived, it was Silas waiting. She had a stubbornness about her. Not loud or showy, but in the way she set her jaw when her shoulder flared up, or how she refused to sit down until something was finished. Colt noticed. He noticed a lot more than he let on. She asked questions in bits. "You always live alone?" "Yes." "No wife?" "No." "No family nearby?" He hesitated, then, "None alive." That was all he said. She didn't press. But the silence was starting to carry more weight now. Not tension, understanding. 2 people sharing the same space, breathing the same cold air, both knowing they weren't whole but too tired to fake otherwise. That afternoon, they sat on overturned crates outside the cabin, drinking coffee as the wind ran low across the brush. Rook lay between them, his chin resting on his paws. Colt kept his eyes on the tree lean, always scanning. But this time he spoke first. "You got people who might still be looking for you?" Lenora didn't answer right away. Then, "Not in a way that matters. And if someone tried to take it, they'd learn the hard way that both of them had run out of places to run to." The storm held for 5 days. Wind scoured the ridgeline every night, snow piling against the cabin's western wall until the windows disappeared behind it. The world outside became silent, buried, unfamiliar. Inside, the fire never went out. Routine shrank. Mornings began late, evenings ended early, and time stretched between small, necessary tasks. Colt and Lenora spoke more, though not often and never idly. Their words had weight, placed carefully, like stones across an icy stream. They passed long hours in shared work. Lenora repaired gloves and sorted dried herbs while Colt cleaned and oiled the tools. When the wind rose too hard to ignore, they sat near the stove, sharing coffee and heat, watching the flames dance in the ironmouth. It was on the third day of the storm that Lenora finally asked a question she'd kept buried. "Looks like it's going to snow again," she said. Colt didn't move from his chair. "You staying?" he asked, his voice flat. She looked back. "I'll help bring in the goats tomorrow." And with that, she sat beside him. Neither of them had said the words. Not trust, not safety, not anything fragile. But both of them had made a choice. And for now, in the deep silence of the Wyoming winter, that choice held. By the end of the week, snow had settled into the land like it belonged there. It didn't fall heavy, just steady, flakes drifting across the open flats, dusting the roof, collecting along the porch rail. Colt kept the paths clear, boots crunching through the frost each morning as he moved between the cabin and the woodpile, the goat shed and the fence posts. He didn't speak unless there was something worth saying. Lenora had learned to match that rhythm. She still favored her shoulder, but her strength was coming back. The bruises had faded. The bandage came off 2 days ago. She held his eyes. "Do I?" "You do now." The moment stretched. She looked down into her mug, her breath catching for a half-second. Then she nodded once, slow. Not acceptance, not surrender, just understanding. That night, Colt pulled a second cot from the back room and used, still smelling faintly of dry cedar, and placed it near the fire. Lenora said nothing, just laid her blanket on it and lay down facing the stove. She slept without twitching for the first time since she arrived. In the early hours before sunrise, the storm outside swelled. Winds howled through the ridge. Snow piled against the outer walls. And inside, the cabin held firm. It didn't talk about Silas Dent. They didn't talk about what they would do if someone came. But the rifle was cleaned and propped by the door, and the revolver sat on the table between their cots. Not as a threat, but as a boundary. This was their place now. That night, after the last lantern was trimmed and the animals were secured, they sat by the fire and shared a tin of beans and some old rye bread. The snow had started falling just before sunset, light at first, but steady. Colt glanced at the window. "Pass will be shut by morning," he said. Lenora pulled her blanket closer. "Then we're not going anywhere for a while." Colt gave a small nod. "You all right with that?" She thought about it, then said something she hadn't voiced since she arrived. "I don't know what I'm supposed to want anymore." Colt didn't push, just poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed her one. "Then don't rush to figure it out." Rook snored lightly in the corner. The fire snapped, and the question neither had dared speak before finally rose between them, quiet but solid. Lenora shifted, looked toward Colt's chair. "Why haven't you asked me to leave?" Colt kept his gaze on the fire. "Because you don't act like a guest. You act like you live here." Air hung heavy, too quiet, like something was holding its breath. Colt stood at the edge of the porch before dawn, arms folded, watching the ridge. He'd seen storms like this before, ones that buried cabins, ones that turned roads into white traps for days, sometimes weeks. If there was anything needing done, it had to happen now. Inside, Lenora rolled up her sleeves and packed the flour tins tighter, sealing the lids with oilcloth. She moved with the quiet efficiency of someone used to scarcity. There was no small talk between them that morning, but there didn't need to be. By noon, they had hauled in enough wood to last 10 days, shut the coop tight, set traps in the far tree line for rabbits. Colt loaded the mule's panniers with oats and closed the shed behind him. Lenora took inventory of the remaining canned goods. Together, they sealed the windows and double-checked the chimney flue. It wasn't panic, just preparation. Colt checked the wound himself. He didn't ask if she was comfortable with it. She just sat still while he worked. The skin had started to close. He handed her a clean shirt after. She took it without a word and changed behind the curtain hung across the cot. One morning, she came in from feeding the goats, cheeks red from the cold, and set a small tin on the table. "Salt pork's low," she said. "So is flour." Colt nodded. "There's a store in Medicine Creek, 10 miles west. Rideable if the pass doesn't close." She watched him finish shaving, a methodical scrape of steel against his jaw. "You ever go into town?" she asked. "No need. What about the locals?" "Don't know them. Don't want to. Someone runs that store. Old man named Booker. He's harmless." She poured hot water into a chipped basin and rinsed her hands. "What would they think if I showed up there?" Colt looked at her for a moment, weighing the question. "I haven't decided." Colt took a slow sip of coffee. "Winter's almost here. Pass could close for weeks." "I know. If someone's looking for you, they'll be stuck out there." "I know that too." "Then you're safer here." She looked up. "You want me to stay?" He didn't answer right away. Then, simply, "I don't want to find you dead on the trail come spring." That was as close to an invitation as she was going to get. She tied off the thread and laid the shirt across the table. "I don't stay places," she said. "That's how I've stayed alive." He nodded. "Me too." There was a pause, and then she asked something that had been building quietly over the past days. "You said you don't trust people. Why trust me with your rifle, your dog, your food?" Colt leaned back slightly. His expression didn't change, but his voice came low and even. "Because you don't lie. Not about the things that matter." She didn't respond, but the words hit harder than she expected. She had cleaned up well, still thin, still cautious in her body language, but no longer looked like someone running for her life. "They'd think you're mine," he said flatly. Lenora raised an eyebrow. "That's supposed to be comforting?" He shrugged. "It's better than what they'd think if you showed up alone." She didn't argue. He was right. Later that day, Colt showed her where the shells were stored. Tucked into a crate under the floorboards, 2 boxes of .30-30 rounds, a scatter of .38s, and a single box of slugs for the shotgun. He handed her the revolver he kept by the stove. "You know how to use it? I wouldn't be here if I didn't." "Then carry it." That was that. That evening, the subject neither of them had touched since she arrived finally surfaced. Lenora sat near the fire, sewing a tear in one of Colt's work shirts. Her movements were careful, precise. He watched for a while, then asked without ceremony, "You plan on leaving?" She didn't stop sewing. Neither of them looked surprised when the other reached out. By the end of that day, the storm broke. The sky cleared. The pass glittered in the pale sun. The wind eased. And for the first time since Lenora had collapsed on that porch, the land fell quiet in a way that didn't feel like danger. It felt like the start of something neither of them had planned for. The snow receded slowly. It didn't melt. It compacted, hardened under the weak sun, turning the land into a pale crust. By the second day after the storm, the trail to the pass had begun to reappear in thin lines of exposed dirt and broken ice. The cabin stood like a monument in the stillness, unchanged from the outside, but something inside had shifted for good. Colt noticed it first in the way Lenora spoke. She no longer referred to the cabin as your place. Now she said, "We need more kindling, or we should fix that hinge." The difference was small, but meaningful. "If it's nothing, we stay quiet," he said. "If it's something, I'll shoot," Lenora finished. Her hand already closed around the revolver. They waited by the door for nearly 15 minutes, breath slow, eyes sharp. Nothing came. Eventually, Rook sat back down, his ears still perked, but no longer tense. The wind had shifted slightly, less sharp now, pulling eastward. Still, Colt didn't sleep that night. He sat by the fire, shotgun across his lap, listening to the stove creak and the snow settle against the walls. Lenora didn't sleep either. The next morning brought no tracks, no signs of approach. Just the same endless white. But neither of them mentioned aloud. Because even if it had been nothing, they both knew the threat was real and closer than the snow would admit. Later that day, Lenora returned to a question that hadn't been fully answered since her arrival. "You said people think you're dead." "They do. Why keep it that way?" Colt stirred the pot of beans on the stove. "Because if they knew I was alive, someone would come." "You think they still care after all these years?" He didn't answer, which told her everything. There were men out there, some old, some patient, who didn't forget. Men who waited for deaths to come due. And if they ever crossed paths with Silas Dent, it wouldn't take much for word to spread. About a girl with a scar on her shoulder. About a man who disappeared into the hills. So they didn't speak about the future. Instead, they focused on the now. They shoveled snow from the roof, mended the goat pen, counted the dried meat. But somewhere in their shared silence, something had shifted again, not with drama, not with a kiss or confession, but with something simpler. When Colt came in with a split lip from slipping on the frozen steps, Lenora wiped the blood and told him to sit. When she woke coughing from the cold, he wrapped another blanket around her without comment. About how he gave her space to heal without ever once asking her to explain herself. She picked up the revolver from the shelf, checked the chamber. 6 rounds. Then she spoke, voice steady. If they come, I'll shoot first. Colt looked at her, not with surprise, not with pride, but with acknowledgement. I know you will. In the final hours before dawn, they sat at the table across from each other, weapons ready, fire burning low. Rook lay still beside the door. The cabin was quiet, not afraid, just waiting. And for the first time in either of their lives, neither of them felt alone. The air was still when the first hoof cracked the frozen ground. Colt was already awake. He'd been sitting by the window since before the sky turned gray. His eyes tracked the slope beyond the fence line. Movement was slow, deliberate. 3 riders, not 4. Each wore thick coats and broad hats, and their horses moved as if they'd been pushed hard through snow. She no longer walked around the table. She moved through the space as if it belonged to her too. Colt didn't say anything about it, but he made space for it. He took the second cot apart and folded the frame into the storage room, brought out the thicker wool blanket and spread it across his own bed. That night, when Lenora asked where she should sleep, he simply nodded toward the bed and laid his own coat on the floor without a word. She didn't object. They both knew it wasn't about romance, not yet. It was about proximity, about trust, about staying warm, staying alive, staying close to something that didn't feel temporary. The day after, Colt rode the mule to the ridge while Lenora tended the coop. When he returned, his jaw was set, eyes narrowed. He dusted off the saddle and leaned the rifle against the wall before speaking. There's a trail cut across the western slope, he said. Fresh. 3 horses, maybe 4. Lenora wiped her hands on her coat. Could be anyone. He shook his head. There's no justice for men like me. Not when the story's already written. She understood that too well. They both lived in the margins, where facts meant less than reputations, where innocence could be buried under rumor and convenience. That night, as Colt sealed a draft along the base of the door, Rook let out a low growl, not loud but focused. Both of them froze. Colt moved toward the window, brushing aside a heavy wool curtain. The world outside was white and blind, the wind too thick to see through. Nothing. No shapes. No movement. But Rook didn't stop. Lenora stepped to the corner, hand resting near the revolver on the table. Her voice was calm but tight. You think someone's out there? No tracks, Colt said. But a man could get close if he knew where to look. Rook growled again, this time stepping toward the door. Colt opened the trunk under the cot and pulled out the shotgun. Loaded it. Snapped it shut. What happened the night you left Cheyenne? Colt was sharpening a blade. He paused, the whetstone still in hand. He didn't look at her, but he answered. There was a man, Jack Romley, on land near mine. His cattle kept slipping into my range, eating my feed. We'd argued for months. Lenora watched his hands move, slow, deliberate. One night, he came drunk, accused me of rustling. I told him to leave. He didn't. We fought. I shoved him hard. He hit his head on a rail. Didn't get up. He set the blade down. 2 more men came later that night, his brothers. Found him dead, saw the fire from my barn. Assumed I'd torched it to cover the kill. Did you? No. Fire was from a knocked lantern. But that didn't matter. I wasn't about to explain myself to men with blood on their minds. She was quiet for a moment. So you ran. I walked, he corrected. Didn't look back. She looked down, processing. You ever think of turning yourself in? Telling the full story? Colt didn't respond right away. They weren't following the road. They were tracking. Moving slow. deliberate. She didn't need him to say more. Her breath slowed. Silas. Maybe. How far? Day. Day and a half. If the weather holds. They didn't panic. Panic wastes time. Instead, they moved with purpose. Colt double-checked every round. Cleaned the rifle, reloaded the shotgun, placed both within easy reach. Lenora restocked the kindling near the stove, packed jerky and dry bread into a cloth sack, filled both canteens. They weren't planning to run, but if it came to that, they would be ready. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Rook paced near the window, ears stiff. The wind was calm, but there was a kind of tension in the air, like a low hum just under the skin. In the silence, Lenora finally voiced what Colt had already considered. If they come here, they'll bring more than one man. He nodded. Silas isn't the type to risk face alone. These weren't ranchers out checking fence lines. These were men who knew exactly where they were going. Lenora stepped up beside him, the revolver already on her hip. She looked out the window, jaw tight. They're armed, she said. I see long guns. Colt nodded once. 2 repeater rifles. 1 double barrel. Maybe a knife on the front man's belt. She turned toward the stove. We'll hold the cabin. He responded without turning from the glass. We hold the cabin. Colt handed her the carbine. Stay low. Keep to the inner wall. No warning shots. Lenora gave a sharp nod. They wouldn't show up like this unless they came to take something. Colt locked the front door, secured the back entrance with a steel brace, and checked the chimney. Smoke was light, no longer rising thick and visible. The heat inside would last a while without being tracked. Every movement was exact, measured. Outside, Silas cursed. Then enough. A long pause followed. Colt moved back to the window, rifle ready. Silas stood alone now, his remaining man huddled by the gate, cradling his leg. The third, silent. You made your point, Silas called out. I came for a girl, not a war. Colt didn't respond. Silas raised his hands. I'll walk away. She can keep her name, but you let us go. Colt finally stepped forward. You ever come back, ever so much as send someone down this pass again, I'll finish what I started today. Silas didn't reply, just turned and walked. The wounded man limped behind. They left the third where he fell. Only after their silhouettes disappeared down the ridge did Colt lower his weapon. Lenora stepped beside him, face unreadable. They'll come back. Maybe, Colt said, but not soon. She looked at the wall, now cracked from a bullet. We should patch that. After breakfast, he replied. Then he turned to her, studied her for a moment. You all right? Then he answered, calm and direct. She didn't steal anything. She left. You don't know what kind of girl you've let into your home, Silas replied, his tone tightening. I've got a contract. Signed. Witnessed. I don't honor that kind of paper, Colt said. And I don't hand people over. There was a pause. Then Silas' voice shifted, lower now, colder. You sure you want this fight, Ashburn? Ain't nobody coming to save you. Town won't ride for a ghost. Colt stepped out from behind the stove, placed his back to the wall beside the window. I'm not asking anyone to ride, he said, the sound of reins snapping. One horse stepped forward. Colt didn't hesitate. He raised a rifle and fired. The round punched through the side post of the gate, startling the horses. The riders ducked instinctively. One man cursed and fell from his mount, wounded, not dead. The other 2 dismounted quickly, seeking cover behind the fence. This was the version of Colt that had survived ranch wars, range disputes, courtroom threats, and men too proud to back down. He didn't bark orders. He didn't panic, but he didn't hesitate either. By the time the horses reached the gate, Colt and Lenora were both in position. The dog, Rook, crouched behind the table, ears forward, unmoving. Then came a knock. It wasn't loud, just deliberate. 2 strikes. Colt didn't move from behind the stove. Keep your rifle steady, he said to Lenora, his voice barely above a whisper. Outside, a voice called. Colt Ashburn. Ain't no need to die in that cabin. The accent was Western Plains, but polished, articulate enough to sound dangerous. Silas Dent. No doubt now. Colt remained silent. Silas spoke again. You've got something that belongs to me. Her name's Lenora. No answer. You don't need to protect her. She's a thief. Ran off with more than a horse. She made a deal and broke it. Colt waited a beat.